Welcome to meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Please select your preference now. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. As is my normal practice, I will hold up a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds left in your intervention, and I will hold up a red card for when your time for questions has expired. Please keep your screen on gallery view so that you can see the cards when I hold them up, as I would not like to cut you off. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on February 23rd, 2021, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology is meeting today to continue its study on the competitiveness in Canada. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. From la Fédération des Chambres de commerce du Québec, Monsieur Philippe Noël, directeur principal, Affaires publiques et économiques, et Monsieur Mathieu Lavigne, conseiller principal. From Norquay Ski Resorts and Sightseeing Resort, Ms. Jan Waters, Managing Partner. From the Wood Source Inc., Mr. Tim Priddle, Owner. From the Treasury Board Secretariat, Mr. James Van Rolte, Executive Director, Regulatory Policy and Cooperation Directorate from the Regulatory Affairs Sector. And from Unifor, Ms. Kaylee Thiessen, National Representative, Research Department. Each witness will present for up to 5 minutes, followed by rounds of questions. With that, we will start with the Fédération des Chambres de commerce du Québec. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Oui, bonjour.
Good morning. I'm Philippe Noël, and I'm Director of Public and Economic Affairs, and I'm accompanied by Pierre-Mathieu Lavigne, who's in charge of Public Affairs. So our federation represents 132 chambers and 1,100 corporate members and over 50,000 businesses. Our members operate in all sectors of the economy and throughout Quebec. As the largest network of business people and companies in Quebec, our federation also acts as a provincial chamber of commerce, putting forward the interests of its members in public policy matters. We thank you for the invitation to testify on major issues for Quebec entrepreneurs, competitiveness. So we are going to focus on a few key points in our opening remarks, and then we'll be ready to answer your questions. First of all, for Federation members, improving our competitiveness requires a review of certain existing measures and a reduction in the regulatory and administrative burden. The current crisis represents an opportunity to eliminate the measures that are harmful to entrepreneurship. And with the 2017 reform, it's still more tax efficient to transfer to a stranger rather than a family member. By transferring his business to his child, an entrepreneur loses tax exemptions totaling $860,000, and he could benefit from by selling to a stranger, which is nonsense, considering the need for reacquisitions. It should be noted that 23% of current business owners in Quebec intend to sell their businesses in a few years, 1/3 of which to family members.
Service de traduction.
Ah oui, pas de problème.
Merci beaucoup.
As I was saying, it should be noted that the report of the Standing Senate Committee on National Finance recommended the complete withdrawal of the measures provided for in the reform of the taxation of private companies. Second, an element that could greatly contribute to the competitiveness of businesses is to facilitate an increase in accessibility of SMEs to federal government contracts. We're participating in the federal government supplier advisory committee. The ongoing reform of the Buy Canada web portal for the dissemination and access to calls for tenders is a step in the right direction, and it deserves to be underscored. However, an additional effort to proactively disseminate this information to businesses must accompany this new web portal. In addition, all levels of government should give more importance to innovation and environmental impact criteria in their calls for tenders. Third, the Government of Canada should have a better plan to encourage SMEs to move into export markets by increasing awareness of the benefits and provisions of our various trade agreements and set a target for the number of companies that succeed in exporting for the first time a result of a service or of financial assistance. A recurring argument heard from SMEs is the lack of information dissemination about the benefits of these trade agreements. They feel that the government should provide better after-sales service to these SMEs. Although several mechanisms are in place, information does not always seem to reach SMEs as effectively as desired. The government should be more productive in informing businesses of the advantages of our trade agreements and the benefits of conquering Europe and Asian markets, particularly by helping businesses make their first export. The budget tabled last Monday mentions that there will be export assistance for clean technologies and work to be done with EDC, but it would be worthwhile paying particular attention to this component. And finally, one issue that's still not resolved and that is disadvantageous for Quebec companies is the double tax reporting that they must do each year. Quebec's the only province to file two tax returns, and for businesses, this reality can result in thousands of dollars in additional costs. Quebec, is passing the ball over to Ottawa's court, and Ottawa passes it back to Quebec's court. And we hope that the federal government and Quebec government will finally sit down together and find a solution that allow both governments to work together and Quebecers to file a single tax return each year. Various options can be put on the table. However, tax integration would allow both governments to save taxpayers money. Thank you very much for inviting us. Our federation encourages federal elected officials to implement our recommendations to improve the competitiveness of our business. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Noel.
You have the floor for 5 minutes. Ms. Water is? You're still on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation today. Today, I'm going to briefly speak to 3 topics. Firstly, I'll speak to some of the projects my family and I have been engaged in with various levels of government over the last 6 years in Banff to address the impact of personal vehicles on the park. These include our efforts to develop a multimodal green transit hub at the Banff train station and raise funding and government support for passenger rail service from the Calgary Airport to Banff. These projects have the potential to help transform Banff from a laggard in transportation GHGs in North America to a laggard in transportation GHGs into North America's first net zero emissions community. Secondly, I'm going to share my perspective on why Parks Canada has at least 2 components of its corporate culture that pose significant barriers to its ability to successfully advance transformational projects. And finally, as an extension of this last point, I'll provide my view as to why a public-private partnership business model must be adopted to make real change. As a way of background, I've been a resident of Banff for 24 years, and during that time, my family, like so many others in the park, have grown increasingly concerned about traffic congestion in the town and around the national park. Traffic jams are commonplace and are a national embarrassment. In fact, in the time that I've lived here, it has become routine for me to hear in our community comments like, "What are they going to do about it?" Then one day, my husband and I stopped and asked ourselves, just exactly who is this they, anyways? You see, over the years, there have been many great ideas put forth by others to address congestion that failed to get advanced. We observed that the big transformational ideas were dead on arrival because the groups that advocated them lacked the real estate and some of the infrastructure to make them happen. And so, with this as background, 6 years ago, my family and I essentially lost our minds and decided to throw our hat into the ring and see if we could become part of this they and and attempt to bring some of the change that had been passed over in decades past. At the time, our view was, how hard can this be? We're going to invest in some real estate. We're going to work with government to build some infrastructure. And all of this would be done hand in hand with the government of Canada. Kumbaya, it would be. Well, to this end, we purchased the multi-decade lease for the historic Banff train station with the hopes of using the station and our new role as a stakeholder to spearhead the return of passenger rail service. Secondly, we purchased the multi-decade lease from CP Rail for 32 acres of land around the station so we could finally build intercept parking, something that had been official town policy for 40 years, and yet not a single intercept parking lot had been built. And finally, a year later, we purchased the long-term lease for Norquay Ski Hill with the hopes of creating aerial transit between the station and the hill. Our vision was to create a multimodal transit hub. Since embarking on these projects, our experience in working with government has been very mixed. With respect to intercept parking, we have some good news. Back in September of 2019, we opened our Banff's first ever intercept lot with 500 free parking stalls available to Banff's 4.2 million visitors. As for Calgary Airport to Banff passenger rail, with considerable help from the Canada Infrastructure Bank, we are helping to advance the project and are making great progress. Happy to talk about that in the Q&A. Thirdly, with respect to aerial transit, our first proposal was after waiting 18 months, Parks Canada came back to us and told us that they are declining our gondola, and we are resubmitting a different proposal to them in the coming months. Finally, one of the projects that we're very proud of is we spearheaded the creation of Banff National Park Net Zero 2035. It's a grassroots, bottom-up initiative to create sustainable vehicle and visitor transit systems and low-carbon energy and waste solutions to transform Banff National Park into North America's first net zero community by 2035. We call ourselves a do tank, not a think tank, and are actively pursuing our work in this area. We've done a lot of research to show that this is not a problem in search of a solution. The key research we showed that Banff National Park has 63 times the transportation GHGs of Zion National Park in the United States.
Ms. Waterous,
63 times. Sorry.
you're over time. Could you kindly wrap it up?
Sorry.
Thank you.
So this is not a solution. Our vision is not a solution in search of a problem. What we need is for government to come on board and work with us so that we can reach a solution that will work for all Canadians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Priddle. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, honorable members of the committee, for taking time today to listen to one business person's story. As policymakers, one of the most important things you can do is consult with stakeholders and make decisions based on their input. I know of many instances where stakeholders weren't consulted and policies ended up not working out. I can think of the story of the butternut tree in Ontario and the more recent federal government's rapid housing initiative. The wood source has grown from a 2-employee and 2 owners in 1998 to 70 employees today. That growth has come at a cost, as you can see from looking at my gray hair. Running a small business in Canada today is very complex. The Wood Source Inc. went through a major expansion in 2004 and again in 2014. After each expansion, I said never again. The journey from concept to completion of an expansion will be at a minimum 4 years, often longer. The soft costs are typically half the cost of the total project, which makes our products more expensive and makes us less competitive on the international scene. We discussed a further expansion in 2018, but we ran out of steam after meeting with a consultant and decided our energy level was not high enough to tackle the expansion. We're currently considering a further expansion, buoyed by a friend who said, "Tim, the problem is you're always using your own money to expand. Why don't you use government money?" We have always used our own money to expand. He has, however, introduced me to a consultant who makes a living accessing government money for people. Apparently, I'm able to access resources from up to 18 different provincial and federal programs, and I have a list of them, but I don't want to go through them. It would take too long. This kind of makes my head spin. The consultant just takes a cut of what they access for you. I always thought I had to do it alone. I am not completely comfortable with this approach. My business sense smells a rat. I've always thought if a business sees an opportunity, it should be able to capture it on its own. I believe that if government helps provide a level playing field and sets the parameters, businesses will operate efficiently and invest where investments need to be made. I'm still trying to process the information and decide what to do with it. Our business exports wood to both the United States and Europe. All of our European exports travel through the port of Montreal. As a business, anything that affects our supply chain affects us. And our supply chain is actually quite fragile. We've come to realize this through labor unrest in Montreal at the port and the almost complete shutdown of our nation's railway system in early 2020 because of protests in the Belleville area. These are major concerns of ours. In order to operate our business, we need to be competitive in the various areas that our business supplies product. So if we hope to sell into the US or Europe, we have to operate in a way that allows us to compete with Americans and Europeans. We have two disadvantages before we even start producing. One, our electricity rates are much higher than our peers in Europe and in the US. Two, we have much higher cost of real estate here. Our cost per square foot of production facilities is almost 40% higher than similar US facilities and 18% higher than European facilities. Domestically, we're very involved in the supply to the home building industry with various products. This industry is, generally speaking, archaic. We still build homes the way we did 50, 60, 70 years ago. Because of the high costs and difficulties of building businesses, most homes are still built by a number of carpenters, a few saws, and a pickup truck. The number of skilled trades is shrinking and the cost of construction is going through the roof. Unfortunately, most home building companies consider employees to be a liability and hire as few as possible and subcontract as much as possible. And that is true for many businesses. I may suggest there are a few things the federal government can do to help Canada innovate and compete. They would be make it easier and less burdensome to hire people. If that occurs, businesses will do that. Two, there are many small businesses attempting to transfer businesses from one generation to the next. Succession planning is complicated and expensive. The changes to the dividend rules for family businesses make this more difficult. The next generation are heavily invested in technology and innovation and need the hope of achievable ownership to motivate them. In keeping with number two, support shred tax incentives with more emphasis on small business in such a way that new ideas being brought forward by the next generation can be nurtured with less financial risk to others. Business owners like certainty. The ongoing, never-ending softwood dispute needs to be resolved for the long term. Give me, Madam Chair, 10 more seconds. Ensure CFIA and European counterparts are on the same page for export documents. Ensure we have good supply channels within Canada and support Canadian manufacturing. We should be proud of making stuff in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Priddle. We'll now go to Mr. Van Rolte. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the invitation to join you here today. I want to focus my remarks on how regulations can impact Canada's competitiveness. And this is an issue that has been a recurring theme and has significantly influenced the current federal approach to regulation making, as well as most regulatory reform initiatives to date. Let me start by saying that regulations are essential to protect consumers, ensure the health and safety of Canadians, and safeguard the natural environment. It is understood that when government imposes any rules, like a labeling or testing requirement, that it will create costs for those who need to comply. When we at TBS talk about regulations' impact on competitiveness, we are referring to the unnecessary costs or inefficiencies, or sludge, created by a regulation or its program. These can be the result of duplication and overlap across jurisdictions, slow and manual processes, or requirements that are too prescriptive and thus impact on a firm's ability to use technologies and adopt innovative approaches. The Government of Canada governs the development, management, and review of federal regulations through a policy called the Cabinet Directive on Regulation. One of the 4 key principles of the directive is that regulations must support a fair and competitive economy. That is, regulations should aim to support and promote inclusive economic growth, entrepreneurship, and innovation for the benefit of Canadian business. To limit the costs imposed on Canadian business and to achieve other public policy objectives, the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat requires that regulators undertake significant analysis when designing and planning the implementation of regulations. For example, they must look at the impacts on small business, the impacts on international trade and regulatory alignment with other jurisdictions, modern treaty implications, environmental impacts, and conduct gender-based analysis. There are also measures in place like the legislated one-for-one rule under the Red Tape Reduction Act that works system-wide to control the growth of administrative burden on business. For every new dollar of administrative burden imposed on business, federal regulators must find $1 in savings. Since the implementation of the Cabinet Directive in 2018, TBS has focused on initiatives to improve regulatory competitiveness, agility, and innovation. We have regulatory cooperation fora with the US, the EU, and the provinces and territories to reduce regulatory misalignment and barriers to trade. We are undertaking comprehensive regulatory reviews to identify rules and practices that are creating bottlenecks to growth and innovation. We've established a center that focuses on building capacity for regulators to design flexible regulations in order to enable new and innovative products to come to market. And we're developing other tools like an annual TBS-sponsored piece of legislation to remove requirements that stand in the way of modernizing regulations, like requirements for wet signatures or the use of outdated technologies like fax machines. The advice of TBS's External Advisory Committee for Regulatory Competitiveness has been crucial in helping shape the direction of these modernization initiatives and provide advice on others being considered. The committee has highlighted some challenges that are real in trying to address the issue of regulatory competitiveness. First, regulatory costs are not limited to federal regulation. Burden stems from all governments, federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal. All rules, programs, and taxation create burden for stakeholders, whether they be business, not-for-profits, or individuals. And very often there is a misunderstanding of what is truly in the federal regulatory sphere. Second, there is no universal way or accepted methodology of measuring cumulative burden or the impact of regulation on competitiveness. In 2019, TBS commissioned the OECD to examine the approaches used around the world to better consider regulatory competitiveness, and I can tell you there's very little to work with in this area. To address this gap, we've been working with the University of Waterloo's Problem Lab to pioneer an approach on measuring cumulative burden by examining a real situation, building a meat processing plant in the municipality of Hamilton. One can imagine the complex interactions between zoning bylaws, environmental regulations, and food inspection regimes, and those are the known administrative hurdles. To conclude, I want to reiterate the regulatory competitiveness continues to be a priority for TBS. We share your interest in assuring the regulatory system supports economic growth and regulatory efficiency, and take seriously all recommendations to minimize the adverse impacts of regulations on competitiveness while maintaining Canada's high standards for health, safety, security, and environmental stewardship. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. And we'll now go to Ms. Thiessen. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you. My name is Kaylee Thiessen. I'm an economist, policy analyst. I work in the research department at Unifor. Unifor represents 315,000 members across the country, including thousands that have been affected by decisions made by the Competition Bureau, even just in the last few years. The last time Unifor appeared before this committee to discuss competition in Canada was July 6th of last year. You were investigating the potential collusion of 3 grocery giants when they all canceled pandemic pay on the same day. The results of your study revealed that Canada's Competition Bureau is ill-equipped to protect Canada's economy from many anti-competitive acts, including those that affect workers. And that's what I'll be addressing today. Unifor members that have been directly affected by at least 4 of the Competition Bureau's recent investigations include those working for Air Canada, Transat AT, that merger, the investigation into Torstar Post-Media newspaper closures, the current investigation into the proposed acquisition of Shaw by Rogers, and also the accusations of wage fixing at Canada's grocery giants, which I just mentioned. In each of the cases, the effect on workers could have been positive, it could have been negative, but in all of the cases, the Competition Bureau had limited capacity and political will to investigate the impact that those mergers or other firm behavior could have had on workers. The most blatant example is the accusations of collusion into wage fixing to cancel pandemic pay. As its rationale in declining to investigate, the Bureau released a statement on the application of the Competition Act to no poaching, wage fixing, and other so-called buy-side agreements that involve the purchase of a product or service. That statement acknowledged that wage fixing agreements can have anti-competitive effects in the labor market, and they raise serious competition issues. The same document, though, also states that the Bureau cannot investigate companies for these actions under the criminal provisions. This is the result of a change to the Competition Act in 2009 that removed the word purchase from Section 45 of the Act. So Unifor is recommending that that change be reversed. That's our first recommendation. Another issue I'd like to address is the Bureau's failure to use the powers at its disposal to investigate the impact of mergers on jobs. There's a growing body of research that shows how a firm may develop outsized power to set wages within the labor market. This is sometimes called monopsony power. We know that unionization acts as a countervailing power in a monopsony situation, but the government should also be creating better conditions to encourage unionization, and Canada needs additional tools to ensure that competition policy drives healthy outcomes for working people. The Bureau should develop specific merger enforcement guidelines to assess a merger's impact on wages, working conditions, and whether or not the number of jobs decreases as a result of the merger. So that's number 2, recommendation number 2. And I'll just say that I called the Bureau directly on this in the last couple of years, asking where I should direct my questions, and the customer service representative who took my call had no idea. Where should I ask these questions about the effects on workers? And they said, I don't know, there's nowhere for me to send you. So that was a bit baffling, and that needs to be rectified. Next, I would like to address the efficiencies defense. First, it should be eliminated. And second, the Bureau, and frankly, the Canadian government and all of us in general, should adopt a broader definition of efficiency that considers the actions we should take or avoid in order to create a fairer, more equitable society. Currently, the Bureau and Tribunal use this narrow definition, or a definition that focuses only on lower costs or increased savings and profit as a gold standard in efficiency that ends up valuing corporations over people, and we need to change that. This approach is unfair and harmful to workers, and it undermines the public good. Finally, my last point, The administrative penalties provided for in the Act are minuscule compared to the balance sheets of many large corporations. In my opinion, this means they're at risk of just becoming the cost of doing business, a situation the Bureau has stated it wants to avoid. Our members are directly affected by Canada's competition policies every day. In our experience, the Bureau lacks the power it needs to ensure mergers do not negatively affect jobs or to ensure that firms do not collude to keep wages and working conditions low. Thank you, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you so much. So we will now start our rounds of questions. Our first 6-minute rounds, we will start with MP Poilievre. You have the floor.
Mr. Priddle, you employ people in my riding. How many people work for you at the wood source?
We have 70 full-time staff here.
You had an expansion that concluded about 4 years ago, a large warehouse in which you do milling and other work on lumber products. How much did you spend on government in order to get that built?
We spent about $600,000 in architects' fees, consultants' fees, development fees, planning application fees, building permit fees, and the building itself was just over $1 million.
Wow, so you spent $600,000 on government for $1 million building.
That is correct.
And that $1 million, does that include the 600,000?
No, so
so it added 60% to the cost.
Added 60% to the cost of the
You have two warehouses, though. There's the old warehouse that's about the same dimension. It's about 30 or 40 feet away. When that was originally built 50 years ago, how much time and money did the then owners have to spend on government?
Well, it was built in the early 1970s, and we are currently in the city of Ottawa. Back then it was Osgood Township, and it was the permit was applied for on a Monday, and on a Thursday they had the permit. It was a one-page document that had the site plan, the building, the engineer's drawing, the engineer's stamp, and away they went.
So wait a sec here. They applied on a Monday and they got the permit on a Thursday?
That is correct.
And how long did it take you for your new warehouse 30 feet away?
Well, it took just over 3 years to get the permit to start construction from when we initiated the conversation.
So back in the 70s, it took 3 days, and now it takes 3 years.
That would be at maybe 4 days in the 70s to 3 years now.
Okay. And has that old building, has it collapsed on anyone?
No, it's actually a beautiful structure built with unique construction methods, nail laminated timber using great Canadian lumber, and it's doing its job beautifully today.
But it hasn't erupted in flames or exploded or killed anyone?
No, as we say here, knock on wood, it's still standing and doing well.
Good pun. I like that. So in other words, the regulators did their job back in the 70s in 4 days to allow for the safe construction of a big, beautiful building that created hundreds of jobs over the decades. They did that in 4 days. Now it takes 3 years to do the very same thing. You spent $600,000 on government to build this new facility. How many people could you have employed doing productive work for your company with that $600,000?
That's a tough question to answer. So it would bring the cost of production down, and we would be far more competitive. So we've over the years had to compete against offshore companies. Huge amount of competition with Asian companies that have very, very cheap electricity, cheap cost of labor, no health and safety issues,
but generally speaking, what roughly how many jobs does $600,000 represent? Roughly, you don't need to be
so that would be another 7 or 8 full-time employees.
So 7 or 8. Now multiply this story, everyone, times thousands of businesses across the country that could be hiring and paying wages with this money, but instead are spending the money filling out paperwork for government to achieve precisely nothing above and beyond what was achieved 50 years ago with 3 or 4 days and a few $1,000s to get the same approval done. That is the gatekeeper economy. It drives down jobs and wages and drives up consumer prices because businesses, of course, have to pass on these costs to the consumer and to the worker. Now, Tim, the consultants say, don't worry about all this paperwork. We'll do it for you. You pay us a fee, and then we'll go and get you a grant from a bunch of government departments to compensate you for all of the costs government has imposed on you. So in other words, they block you from building and then they subsidize you to build. If you had two options, option one is the government gets out of your way, gives you a simple, clear, and safe approval, and lets you build with your own money. Or option B, they delay you for 4 or 5 years and charge you 600 grand, but then offer you a taxpayer-funded grant to compensate you for those costs. Which of those two options as an entrepreneur would you prefer?
I will always prefer the former, where we look after things and do our things ourselves. And I don't want any of the members of the committee to think that we're some fly-by-night operation. All our members are members of the International Brotherhood of Carpenters or joiners. We look after our family here. We aren't trying to do anything to damage the economy, damage the environment. We want to grow and develop and turn Ottawa back into a lumber town, moving it away from the political town it's become. Take us back in history a bit.
Absolutely. It was a lumber town. That's how the city was founded. And you run a great business that's been there for generations and paid good wages and provided good services. Now, if the government could get out of your way, you could do even more. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll now go to MP Assassi. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, if I could start off with Ms. Tyson. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Tyson. One of the specific things you actually referenced in your testimony was changes that were made to the Competition Act in 2009. More specifically, you talked about the removal of the term purchase. Could you share with us what the then government's rationale was at the time for removing the definition of purchase?
What I have done in my research is read what the most recent statement was by the Competition Bureau, in that because of that change, they were unable to investigate the accusations of collusion. Exactly what the rationale was back in 2009, I'm not aware of. I'm aware of the results of that rationale and the effect that that's had on our members. But I would be very happy to do a little bit of digging and get back to you.
I'd be very grateful if it's not too much trouble, if you could submit to us what the then government did in 2009 and what the consequences have been, because it's important that we focus on these types of challenges. So thank you for that. Now, if I could go to Mr. Van Raalte. Thank you for explaining to us what occurred in 2018, the cabinet directive on regulations. You touched on a few of the challenges, and I have to admit the challenges were, I think, challenges that would have been foreseeable. For example, you talked about the regulatory burden and competitiveness and things of that nature. Could you tell us some of the successes that have been accomplished since 2018?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy to share some successes. I think I'd focus on 3 areas. So in terms of regulatory cooperation, we have a very strong relationship, of course, with our trading partners in the United States and have a new free trade agreement with the European Union, and as well with provinces and territories under the Canada Free Trade Agreement. I would say under the internal trade piece, the biggest success to date has been strengthening provincial regulation with respect to the building code. That's a long-standing irritant, and I heard Mr. Priddle reference that. And you will all know, any Canadian would know that it's different rules to build by different jurisdiction and even by different municipality. And thanks to some research and some heavy, I would say, standard development work done by our colleagues at the National Research Council, and quite a bit of collaboration at the provincial level, because that's where it has to happen. We are embarking on a brand new building code process, and that is expected to save the Canadian economy $1 billion a year in construction costs. With our partners in Europe, they are early regulatory cooperation discussions. The example I will provide may be small, but it's an important first step. And Health Canada and the health and safety regulator in Europe have agreed to recognize the safety standards or the safety inspection rules around sunblock in Europe. We've done the same thing in the US, and it means, from an economic perspective, a savings of $100,000 per product coming into Canada for sale from a sunblock perspective. It's small, but everybody needs sunblock. And that's been so successful that Health Canada and the EU have expanded discussions around other non-prescription products developed outside of Canada. I also can point to our regulatory reviews, which have been a very important instrument for Treasury Board in terms of removing both irritants, administrative irritants within the responsibility of regulators, but also looking forward to improved forward-looking regulatory practices and building innovation. We've completed those reviews in the areas of transport, in the areas of health, and in the areas of agriculture and aquaculture. Updates on the progress on those improvements were published in the last few months, and we're looking to publish in the coming weeks regulatory review results in the areas of international standards, of clean tech, and of digitalization.
And just in the very limited time remaining, the one-on-one rule, how is that faring?
Well, the one-on-one rule is entrenched in the Red Tape Reduction Act, which is a bit of a misnomer because the legislation is intended to control administrative burden, and it is doing its job. It is controlling administrative burden.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Député Lemire. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Messrs. Noël and Lavigne from the Quebec Federation of Chambers of Commerce. I used to work for the Union des producteurs agricoles, especially in regard to succession issues. And at the time, and we're talking of some 10 years ago, was the transfer of farms. You referred to succession planning. So you talk about how it's cheaper for a farmer to sell their farm to a stranger than it is to hand it down to their children. And consequently, an owner is not allowed to any exemptions if they sell their farm to their children. What could be the negative impacts on entrepreneurship, not just the harms done to farming? Well, that legislation is a problem. 32% of entrepreneurs started with an already existing enterprise compared to the rest of Canada. So 23% of property owners have the intention to give, their enterprise to their children, but they are being harmed by the regulation. When you think of the fact that you don't have startup costs or unknown factors, when you have an existing enterprise and you can look at all kinds of the data, the past experience, remuneration issues. So there are many advantages for entrepreneurs to keep in the family, and there should be government supports, and this kind of injustice should be ended. To be so penalized when you transfer directly to a member of your family as opposed to a third party, that needs to be changed. And you have to find ways to encourage family entrepreneurship. So the Quebec government has put in place some measures to counter this injustice, but for the measures to be able to work, the federal government, on its part, needs to also correct the injustice. As you know, C2 has just had its third reading in the House chamber yesterday. So the Conservatives have shown leadership in this regard. Now, when the federal government decides to eliminate these obstacles, what do you think the positive impacts could be? Well, for family succession, there will certainly be benefits, but I'll ask my colleague Mathieu to answer, but there would be positive impacts the day that injustice is done away with. And just to do what Quebec has done in place would help. The more you stimulate entrepreneurial indicators and handing down businesses and family, the more it is going to foster our competitiveness internationally. And I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Mathieu. Just to add to that particular aspect, it is important at all times, and there'd be benefits at all time for family succession planning, but even more so in the current context of economic difficulties where entrepreneurs are exhausted and they want to hand the torch over to someone else. But they want to hand it to the best person possible, someone facing the least obstacles possible. So there would be nobody better than the children to take on a family business. Canadian and Quebec economic statistics show that the transfer business fail in many cases, and 10% of entrepreneurs only are successful. So aside from the law and the transfers of business, what other responsibilities under federal government prove to be obstacles? It's maybe Section 81 in the Income Tax Act. You could talk about lightening the tax burden, but if you could at least resolve that problem, you'd make a big step forward. Anything else to add, Mr. Noel? No. I think that measure needs to be ended as soon as possible. And entrepreneurship provides for really good human resources especially when you have a shortage of labor force. You want to be able to help these businesses to deal with the fewest restrictions possible when you want to transfer the business. So that's one of the reasons why we've been pushing this idea so much in recent years. The budget that was recently announced, is that positive for this problem? I think more measures should have been put in place, but we did welcome the budget. Thank you.
This goes to MP Massey. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses. And thank you, Mr. Priddle, for concluding with the question that you received with the remarks that you didn't want to be perceived as a fly-by-night practice. I've researched your site in terms of your business, and you've done some very progressive stuff. And coming from a manufacturing town, CNC and terminology and the way that you approach things are important. So I'd encourage members to visit his website, because I think that gives a lot of credibility to what you're saying, but also too is it kind of will distance some of the question that you had. And some of the question you had was on municipal matters and things of nature that are beyond the scope unless we actually want to enforce provincial changes. But what you did mention, which is something that the committee has dealt in the past, is a SR&ED tax credit. Maybe you can kind of convey a little bit of the difficulty you have getting SR&ED tax credits. And I'm likely to believe that you're probably actually paying for somebody to help you to apply for a SR&ED tax credit as part of the process. I'm just guessing, but please tell the committee about that.
Sure. So SR&ED tax credits are scientific research and educational development credits for work you do, and we have not actually received any SR&ED funding. We have looked into it. We've tried a couple of times on our own, and we've been told that we really need to hire a consultant to do that. And I alluded to that consultant, who gladly will sit down with me and take 20% of the funds he gets for me. And I'm still a bit pigheaded, and I don't like hiring consultants if I don't have to. And
I don't think that's being pigheaded. That's just for the record. This is so committee members. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Priddle, because I'm going to ask the analysts to look at our history in this committee on SR&ED tax credits and our recommendations and what's come back with regards to that, because actually applying for SR&ED tax credits, which is actually a federal program, is a business in itself for, as Mr. Priddle has noted, consultants. So because it's so complicated. So you have not received any, or because you just decided that you didn't want to go that at the end of the day too much.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we sat down with folks from CMHC and a few other government organizations, and they said, really, Tim, if you want to use this program effectively, you have to hire a consultant. We sit down with the consultants, and they chat with about these different programs, and I have a list of 18 different programs with SR&ED and IRAP in there. And
another one.
I just sort of struggle with that concept of someone getting a commission to get me to access government funds. In my business, we filed an objection to CRA a year ago, which may net our company $100,000 if we're right in our objection. The CRA right now is taking 330 days on average to respond to our challenge, and they only meet that target 70% of the time. So I keep thinking in my mind, that's 100,000 or 110,000 that's going to come to us that may push us over the top and get us to develop again or grow our business. Yeah, and if there's 10,000 businesses in the same scenario waiting 330 days for an answer on a pretty basic question, it's really, really difficult for me.
You are in the exact same sphere. And sorry, I'm going to move over to Miss Thiessen soon. But there's our tool and die mold makers here, and we pleaded this case to Maxime Bernier, the minister at the time, many times, as well as subsequent ministers, Clement and so forth. We have had some improvements. But I'm asking the analysts to bring us back and make sure we get all the full responses on this, because these are essential government programs that are rolled out budget after budget and so forth. But it requires small business people who are hustling to grow their business and do the things, either hire a lawyer, hire an accountant, hire one of these consultants that actually make a month. Their job is actually navigating government programs for assistance to business. So I'm going to quickly, I only have a little bit of time left. Ms. Thiessen, I want to ask you about the United States, and I'll come back on the subsequent stuff. The antitrust that they have over there versus ourselves over here, it's a big divergence when I was talking to Mr. Priddle about, but what kind of a disadvantage do we have that as a country? Can you just kind of give us a little glimpse on that as a pivot?
Yeah, well, I guess my understanding of what happens in the US is they are 100% able to investigate the effect of mergers, acquisitions, and other anti-competitive behavior in the labor market. And they consider things like wage fixing to be anti-competitive behavior, which means that then workers are protected from some of the egregious things that can happen when companies collude. That would also include no poaching
like grocery
agreements.
stores. when
Like
they
grocery
decide to
stuff.
collectively end pandemic pay,
Yeah.
coincidentally having conversations on the side.
Yeah, absolutely. And it probably it happens in other areas as well. I mean, we're currently researching the Shaw and Rogers merger and looking at what monopsony power, what might be occurring in that industry, and how we might be able to countervail that with the tools that we have, and why not increase the tools that we have in the toolbox.
Thank you. And I still have the yellow card, so I'll cede at that point. Thank you to the witnesses and Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We'll now start our second round. Our first round of questions goes to Député Généreux. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here, Mr. Lavigne and Loen. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a member of the Montmagny Chamber of Commerce. So I'm well aware of the existence of your federation, and it does excellent work in Quebec by bringing together many businesses. You talked about the transfer of businesses, and my colleague and I actually tabled a bill to address this. And thank you, Mr. Lemire, for having observed that we have been working along the same lines as other parties when it comes to family business transfers. It actually is an issue that speaks to me personally. Now, the crisis is also an opportunity, you say. Why would it be an opportunity for the economic class? But could you comment? Thank you. And thank you for those kind words regarding our organization. We are in touch with many businesses in the sector and many different sectors: tourism, agriculture, big business. And the consequences of the current crisis on income has made it such that government has had to intervene, especially for the economic recovery. There's been direct financial aid, but there's also different measures been introduced to help business. So let's take the opportunity this crisis provides to improve all of the processes, all of the requirements of government, be it Quebec or the federal government, to improve efficiencies in terms of regulation and administrative requirements. That's why we say this crisis can be turned into an opportunity, is to revisit processes and to do things more efficiently, given everything that businesses are asked to do every year. And we've also called for, again, as we have traditionally done, to have a single tax return. Yes, many are in favor of that proposal. Many of us want one single tax return in Quebec. The other aspect, I said I'm an entrepreneur, and we too have been touched by the pandemic that's lasted some 15 more months. Government has had to set aside the management of EI and introduced temporary COVID programs. They were dealing with our outdated problems to be able to even make CERB work. What we've noted with financial institutions to help with loans of, say, 40,000, 60,000, they've been able to act quickly. So it shows that it is possible to do things faster. With this crisis, everyone was pushed to doing things faster. Now, with your business, not just to say with the 40,000, but with the wage subsidy programs, how have those worked? We've had positive feedback with the wage subsidy programs, and that's why we've asked that it be extended until 2022. Well, we have it till September 2021. Yes, we do have it till 25th September, and we're pleased. And but we had asked that it continue till 2022 for planning purposes. And then there was a recruiting component to that. But generally, the feedback is positive. But those programs were put in place extremely quickly and calling upon private sector, credit unions, and it was done so fast, which shows that absolutely everything is possible. That's my own personal observation. Mr. Van Realty. Sorry if I haven't pronounced your name. So there are measures that are not just federal, but also provincial. So you'd think that in normal times you could also move more quickly. The thing is, things have moved so slowly, it's become all a big burden. Well, these are crisis measures. And and yes, it is a crisis, so it pushes us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Our next round of questions goes to MP Erskine Smith. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I want to start with Mr. Van Ralt from the Treasury Board. You know, we have a growing demand across the country or across the world for plant-based proteins. Our government's made a bet on plant-based proteins with respect to the supercluster. There's obviously great integration with our agricultural sector as it relates to pea proteins and other pulses. And yet I received a note from Impossible Foods noting the challenges they face in sending product to the Canadian market, including simulated meat regulations. And I wonder if this is on your radar at all, because they note, as an example, that it's bizarre to even read some of it, that regarding chicken nuggets, a simulated poultry product must have at least 16% total protein and no more than 15% fat per B.22.029. However, an animal-based chicken nugget, white meat only, per food code 7035, only has 14% protein. Animal-based white and dark meat chicken nuggets per food code 7034 have 12% protein and 16% total fat, which do not meet the requirements that simulated chicken nuggets must meet. There's one example. There are other examples within this simulated meat. Is this not red tape? I mean, you have a company here that wants to send product to Canada, to the Canadian marketplace, and we are effectively saying to them, you need to reformulate your products for the Canadian marketplace based on Byzantine regulations. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I'm at a broad level. I certainly am familiar with the investments being made to support the industry around plant protein, and certainly the dynamic that is played out in terms of the interplay between different regulators. I'm not familiar with that specific technical requirement or that technical definition. I would leave that to the subject matter. I completely understand that. It's just one example of a broader challenge, though, as it relates to doing business as between jurisdictions. And I think that the definitional requirement, there may be some administrative burden on that, and that may be unnecessary. It may be a compliance issue. It may be a definitional issue. And so you really would have to work with from an evidence-based perspective and a risk-based perspective to get an answer to the question about why does that type of regulation exist. Well, here's another example, though. I mean, and that is entirely nonsensical in the same category. So our rules, B.01.100 sub 1 of the FDR mandates that literally these words have to be used. So that the word simulated has to be used on our products, and that the words contains no meat or contains no poultry have to be used on the products. In the US, they take a much more sensible approach that simply the rules have to be in place such that consumers are not misled. So we take a very granular, hyper-focused approach that is clearly red tape, when certainly our focus should just be on consumer confusion. And again, we're adding barriers in a Canadian context, and the US just cares about consumer confusion. Well, a couple of maybe considerations around that, Madam Chair, and again, the technical reasons for specific regulations I won't be able to address. But at one layer, there's regular tension with stakeholder interactions, and it's not necessarily with this dynamic, but in trying to provide clarity and far more, I would say, broad objectives around regulations, there's often a call by industry for more clarity and more definition to avoid legal risk.
But plant-based and vegan are words that consumers understand, not simulated and contains. Anyway, I could go on. I want to just highlight one other issue for your attention in a similar space. So we have seen recently the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board invest $50 million into a company related to cellular agriculture. We see Singapore develop a comprehensive regulatory approach, such that in December, they're the first country that has regulatory approval of a cell ag product. The FDA and USDA are collaborating as of March 2019. In the Canadian context, we see zero forward thinking on this. We instead see regulatory approval that requires Health Canada, an environmental assessment, nutritional assessments. We see CFI labeling. There is a business that wants to do business in this space in Canada has no sense of where to go. And the US is working on making this happen. And Singapore's already made this happen. I encourage you to make this happen in Canada.
Thank you very much, MP Erskine-Smith. My apologies, you're over time. We'll now go to Député Lemire. Vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. MP Généreux said he's working on the transfer of his own family business. I hope it's not for his political succession planning, but we'll monitor that. So a question for the Quebec Federation Chambers of Commerce. And international trade agreements are made up of all kinds of regulations, measures, and provisions that make it very difficult for entrepreneurs to understand the rules. Now, what strategy could the federal government develop to increase entrepreneurs' competitiveness internationally? Well, that's a good point. It is our impression that many businesses could benefit from international markets, but there's so many regulatory administrative complexities around free trade agreement provisions. And we expect the federal government to do better promotion of opportunities. Big businesses understand the issues, the trade issues, but the small business that could be exporting are discouraged to try to export internationally. If they had more knowledge and more assistance from the federal government, among others, then they could benefit and no doubt grow their business activities. And I think that that is an opportunity that is just not seized. But there are many agreements, both with Europe and the U.S. 28% of the Quebec economy is linked to goods and service that should be exported, 40% if you conclude other Canadian markets. So there are opportunities to increase business activities, but it would need more promotion and federal government campaign programs. Thank you. You mentioned an administrative burden for business is the tax return. So aside from the single tax return, what other ways could the administrative burden be reduced? I'll let Mathieu answer that question. Well, in that regard, we only have 30 seconds. What we propose is that in Quebec, the government has mobilized the economic associations to come up with an action plan to reduce burden with clear goals and timeline. And everybody's mobilized around that goal, and there's a public accounting system. So we have to mobilize around a clear plan. Thank you.
The next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Thiessen, you mentioned the Roger Shaw takeover, merger, whatever it wants to be characterized. Now, if that was a foreign acquisition, the Investment Canada Act would have some provisions, although they're very weak in enforcement, as we've seen with Stelco and other types of legislative requirements, and following up and enforcing them are quite complicated. But there's at least something there. We're getting a lot of promises and suggestions of things that will happen, but at the end of the day, the reality is that is it really left to collective agreements to actually enforce job protection with that type of a merger or acquisition?
I'll just reiterate that we need as many tools in the toolbox as possible to make sure that these types of mergers and acquisitions don't negatively affect the labor market. Collective bargaining is one extremely important tool, and the use of the Competition Act in order to make sure that that the merger doesn't have that negative effect is another important tool. Together, we can make sure that workers are not impacted in a negative way. And that would be the case. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we heard some of that with the efficiency defense. Are you familiar with that in the Competition Act? And can you, we've heard a lot on it, but I want to hear more in terms of almost a universal agreement that this is antiquated and counter to collective agreements, but also competition.
Yeah, and that just in general, what happens is as long as a company can prove that they will experience more savings or additional profit than the equal or value in the damage that would be done to the Canadian economy through that anti-competitive behavior, then automatically the merger is approved. And so what happens is the benefit to corporations gets put above or a higher level of power over what might actually happen to workers, and that's just something that's not acceptable.
All right, thank you for your answers. I see the yellow sign, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, MP Massey. We'll now go to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I wasn't really going to go here, but I think Mr. Erskine-Smith mentioned about plant-based proteins and so on. I guess if a concern is about simulated chicken nuggets and where that's going to lead people in the future, I think it's important that, vegan ideas and vegan thoughts are great, but promotion at the expense of other industries, not great. We need a few beef animals out there to manage these millions of acres that we have on grazing land. So anyway, I just thought I'd start off with that. And I guess if we want to talk about regulations, maybe we should take a look at oil sand reclamation, because these are regulations that have been in place for years. And here's what one of them says: 100% of land must be reclaimed. The government of Alberta requires that companies remediate and reclaim 100% of the land after the oil sands have been extracted. Reclamation means that land is returned to a self-sustaining ecosystem with local vegetation and wildlife. And if anybody has ever gone there, they will see what that is all about. So I think that's important. Maybe as we discuss that here on Earth Day, keep that in mind. We can also think about the 19 square miles of mined land in China that is there for solar panel production. Rare earth minerals in Africa that are being dug out by children for battery development. These are things that we're going to have to think about as well when we talk about mining for rare earth minerals here in Canada. It's not going to be very easy to get past regulations if we have this attitude that industry is always bad. So believe me, Canada is something that we should be proud of, and so I do stand for that. Mr. Priddle, you had mentioned that soft costs are typically half of the cost of the total project. I wonder if you could expand somewhat on what you see as those soft costs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Soft costs come in very, very different areas. So in the jurisdiction that I work in, we usually start by meeting with the local conservation authority to see what effect we may have on drainage. So there's conservation authority, there's sound studies, emission studies, soil studies, tree studies. We're off of the grid, so to speak, in terms of sewage here, so we have to have septic system studies. So, you have a fleet of engineers that you hire to start doing these studies. We have to do traffic management studies too. So you have to invest a huge amount of money before you can even see if the project's feasible. And each time you do a project, this happens. So the soft costs keep adding up, keep adding up, keep adding up. Then you apply for planning permission, and you might have a site plan application you make, and there's a very heavy fee when you make that application. If you get through that hurdle, then you run into the site plan agreement, coming up with an agreement that satisfies you and the city and the local conservation authority. Then you apply for the building permit. So each stage takes a long period of time, and you don't know until you pass one stage whether you're even going to get to the next stage. So you're incrementally putting out more and more money before you even know if the project is feasible. So it's just uncertainty. Business people don't like uncertainty. We like certainty, and obviously it's not feasible all the time, but unfortunately, many governments can't make any exemptions. Everything has to go by a particular rule, whether it makes sense or not. So there's no common sense clause in legislation.
Well, I know that I was on international trade for a number of years, and we talked to businesses that wanted to get a foothold here in Canada, agriculture based ones, and so on. But then when they talk about how long it takes to get through the regulatory process, they say, well, it's going to take months and years here in Canada. We'll find out an answer. Maybe it won't be the answer we want, but we'll have an answer in a week in other places in the world. And of course, when they have that much money that can be caught up in these projects, it's pretty obvious where they're going to go. So do you have any suggestions as to how we could streamline some of the processes that you've gone through to make it so that others could perhaps enjoy some of the opportunities to work here in Canada?
I've often thought, especially when it comes to international opportunities, that the government needs to have salespersons that can go around and walk businesses through the various stages. We need cooperation between municipal municipal governments, the conservation organizations, provincial governments, and federal governments. They need to get together and, as you guys are trying to do, reduce red tape so that you aren't tripping over each other.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Jasic. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your very interesting testimony today. My first question is for Ms. Waterhouse from Norquay, and you mentioned the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I'm also on the Transport, Infrastructure and Communities Committee, and we've been looking very closely at the Canada Infrastructure Bank. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience dealing with them? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. We've had a fantastic experience with the Canada Infrastructure Bank. When my husband and I decided to take on this kind of gnarly project of trying to return passenger rail to Banff National Park, we knew that the number one thing we had to do was work with them to try and provide the funding to build a dedicated track, something we knew at that time and has been confirmed was going to be over $1 billion. So Canada Infrastructure Bank had been in business 5 days when we flew across the country to meet with them. They didn't have business cards. They had a few light bulbs in the ceiling, and that was it. And they really embraced our vision of moving to this multimodal green transportation hub, of which train travel would be part of it. So I'm going to be really straight. The relationship we've had with them has been outstanding. They've worked with us every step of the way through our project. They have signed an MOU with the province of Alberta to further consider passenger rail, and we are extremely optimistic that our dream of having passenger rail return in Alberta will come to fruition.
Thank you very much for that. So in terms of the red tape that you encountered, obviously as a pretty new institution, the Canada Infrastructure Bank hopefully has tried to streamline things. Can you make any comment about the issue that we're studying here today? In other words, the sort of regulatory burden that you might have faced?
Sure. With the Canada Infrastructure Bank, we found them lean and mean. So we didn't have an issue there. Our issue has really been with Parks Canada because they are a bureaucratic bear. And we knew that. So we were, private citizens living in Banff prior to getting involved in this. And, the feedback we had within our community over the, 24 years we've lived there was, don't even attempt it to try and work with parks. It's if there's a big keep out sign on their door to private businesses. And, we understand their role as a regulator. All the businesses in Banff understand their role as a regulator, and it's an important role. But there should also be an opportunity to have a business hat on to work with private operators. So instead of a keep out sign, what we're thinking and what many businesses are thinking, there should be a sign that says something like, come on in. We want to partner with you with considerations. And so considerations, just like in the business to business community, can be contracts, they can be agreements. We understand all of that, but work with us, private sector, because what what we have observed with the bureaucracy at Parks Canada is that there isn't that same sense of urgency to get things done. So, as I mentioned in my remarks, intercept parking had been official town policy in Banff for over 40 years, and not a single lot was built. Now, why was that? Well, the town of Banff and everyone in it wanted an intercept lot. The issue was that they didn't have land and Parks Canada wasn't going to give them any. So we got involved and bought land from CP Rail or leased it and created the first lot. So that's an example of businesses understanding urgency and importance. And so what you find, just to summarize, what you find in Banff National Park is that there's this real commitment to this, status quo. And the changes that happen are so incremental, so
Ms.
incremental.
Waterhouse, I do perfectly understand the issue of Parks Canada. I just want to, in my last 30 seconds, my riding is home to a very large part of the Rouge National Urban Park, so I can relate somewhat to your comments on Parks Canada. So I'd like to take the opportunity to ask Mr. Van Raalte, how do you, in your role, interact with other ministries? And in particular, have you had any interaction with Parks Canada in terms of the regulatory burden?
Thanks for the question, Madam Chair. Very, very quickly, it would be on new proposals coming through from a regulatory perspective, or if Parks Canada is involved in any of those regulatory reviews to clean up burden.
Thank you very much. We'll now start our third round of questions. Our first round goes to MP Baldinelli. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I just want to follow up on my colleague's questioning to Mr. Van Raalte and just ask, in terms of those regulatory reviews that take place, you had mentioned earlier the changes to the building code as an example. How long would a process typically take? How long would that take in terms of working with the provinces to do something like that?
Thanks for the question, Madam Chair. In terms of regulatory cooperation and working with the provinces and territories, it won't surprise anybody to say it depends. It depends on the complexity of the issue and the complexity of the regulatory framework and potentially how divergent the perspectives are between the provinces and territories. The building code discussions, I think there was momentum that had already been built and probably a source of frustration. And so those negotiations, I believe, took a little less than a year. And then the real heavy work begins in terms of truly harmonizing the regulations going forward. And that's the phase of work that they're in now. If I give another example in terms of the negotiations with the EU over the sunblock issue, again, there was probably a lot of groundwork behind the scenes before we even got involved from a true alignment formalization issue. But again, about 12 to 18 months. And then the systems are in place almost immediately.
Okay, thank you. Now, just following up on the one-for-one rule, and it says, how is the calculation of removing a dollar of regulation for every dollar added? How is that verified?
We
Is it an
verify.
auditor?
No, we verify that within the Treasury Board Secretariat ourselves. So that would come. We have a unit of cost-benefit analysis specialists. We are responsible for tracking the compliance with the one-for-one rule and then reporting on that to Parliament. So we have a small handful of economists that both work with departments in validating methodology, giving them advice, but then also performing a challenge function on, you're not quite got this measurement right. We think you may want to look at this other methodology before we declare everything's good to go for Treasury Board consideration.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I'm going to go to Mr. Priddle for a quick question. I'm going back on some of our notes that we have had here on our competitiveness study, and it says that Canada's red tape report indicated the amount of time spent on regulation by business owners had decreased since 2017, although the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says that could be attributable to businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises being downloaded costs for certain activities such as consultants and kind of downloading that kind of work. Mr. Priddle, my understanding in listening to your presentation is, in fact, I kind of see that's the type of situation that you're facing. Those additional costs and burdens are now being downloaded, and you're being asked to seek help from consultants.
Yes, so it's a complicated playing field, and again, those 18 different programs that we might be eligible for funding, the application program takes some time. If I were to apply to maybe 6 of these and did it myself, I'd probably be into 40 or 50 hours of work to get the applications in. And in trying to operate a business today in the environment we're working in, and we are very, very fortunate. We're blessed to be in a business that's doing well, but still very complicated. Things change every day. I just have no time to dedicate to that. So if I want to access these programs, I have to hire a consultant. There's no choice about it. And it's just whether I think that's right for me to do or not. I haven't sort of worked that one out in my own mind yet.
Thank you. Quickly, thank you, Madam Chair. To Ms. Waterhouse, you had indicated your gondola project had, on first application, been denied by Parks Canada, and you're moving forward on a second application. Typically, how long does that process work with Parks Canada? Say from the concept idea to their first decision. Oh, you're on mute.
Madame Waters, you're still on mute, and very quickly because we're out of time. So if you could answer that very quickly.
Oh, you're on mute.
You're still on mute.
Oh, there
Okay,
you go.
thank you. I've got it. The first proposal that we submitted went into Parks Canada radio silence box for 18 months. And then we got back a letter which said it was that it was denied. There's never a timeline that's given to you other than we are in all of our meetings, we're shown regulatory charts, path to approvals, and have been told that each path can take anywhere from 1.5 years to 3 years. So if you add all that up, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that.
Thank you
Perhaps
so much.
Longer.
My
Thank you,
apologies. My timelines are a little tighter, so my apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Baldinelli. We'll now go to MP Lambropoulos. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being with us here today. My first question is going to go to Mr. Ralt, actually. Canada's red tape report found that business owners have spent less time complying with regulations since 2017, and I was wondering if you can speak a little bit to some of the measures that have been put in place to cut red tape, aimed at cutting red tape that our government's put in since 2015. So what do you think are the reasons for less time being spent on complying with regulations since 2017?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair, and for the member. I think broadly the government has introduced a series of regulatory modernization initiatives that have both attempted to address administrative burden and as well promote economic growth and innovation. I've talked a little bit about the regulatory reviews. I've talked a little bit about regulatory cooperation. We also had in budget 2019 what I referred to in my opening remarks as what we hope to be an annual regulatory modernization bill, which is intended to clean up a potential backlog of small consensus-based regulatory irritants that can help streamline reducing administrative burden. And we hope to be introducing a second piece of legislation this session. And continue that tradition. So it is about continuous improvement and also about having that focus on ridding the system of that unnecessary administrative burden.
Okay, thank you. And the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has said that the decrease could be because of certain cuts to red tape that the government has put in place, but it could also be due to employing a third party to deal with some of this regulatory burden, but it obviously leads to increases in costs to small businesses and medium-sized businesses. Would you agree that this is part of the reason why, or would you argue that it's really because of the government's efforts that less time is spent right now on the regulatory process?
I'm not aware of any system-wide efforts by either industry or consulting companies to address administrative burden. I think Mr. Priddle, I don't want to put words in his mouth, has talked about applying for government programming, but that's very, very different from some sort of third-party effort to address administrative burden.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for Ms. Thiessen. You spoke a little bit about, actually a lot about how the Competition Bureau is inequipped to deal with certain competition issues that arise in Canada, and that the Competition Bureau doesn't necessarily have the power to do what it needs to do in order to ensure that competition is upheld and that businesses have a chance here. You also said that the penalties, the administrative penalties, are becoming like the cost of doing business for a lot of these bigger players. And I understand what you meant by that, obviously, but I would like you to maybe tell us what you think penalties should be and what the Competition Bureau should be allowed to impose when these things happen.
So our recommendations for now are all about let's take a look at what the administrative penalties are and assess what might be a better way. So could it be something like a percentage of revenue instead of a straight sort of $10 million penalty, which for a large corporation is simply the cost of doing business? Could it be a percentage of market cap? There's lots of different ways to go about it. At this point, what we're saying is we need to have a review of what those administrative penalties are. And the other thing is we need to make sure that there's actually the teeth there to enforce and make sure that companies are paying those administrative penalties, because it's not always the case that that's enforced.
Okay, thank you very much. With 30 seconds, I guess I'll just cede my time to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next round goes to Député Lemire. Vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the last time I speak, and I just want to express my solidarity with what the witness is experiencing. There's a lot to be done to support the forestry industry. Now, getting back to the Quebec Federation, doing business with the federal government gives Quebec businesses some good opportunities. However, it's also dealing with all kinds of obstacles in terms of rules, regulations, processes, and even challenge mechanisms. How could the federal government reduce the regulatory and administrative burden? I'll let my colleague Mathieu answer the question. It is a good question. Thank you. We are part of the advisory committee, and so we are very focused on this issue. There is an opportunity for Quebec business to become suppliers to federal government, but it's not well known. Just like we were referring to about the trade agreements, opportunities exist, but we know federal government is working on how to improve that. But the heart of the matter is that the communication needs to be proactive. You have to reach out to the businesses, explain what the opportunities are, how to apply, how to register. The efforts need to be made to reach out to the business. It cannot just be passive. So the federal government opportunities are not well known by Quebec businesses. And perhaps the criteria should also emphasize more the environment and innovation, especially because of the carbon footprint. My impression is that once you're in the system, it's relatively easy and it works well. The problem is how to get into the system because it's rather opaque how to go about it. So what are the requirements for businesses? How can it be improved? Is there a need for more transparency? True. Once you're in the system, in general, the experience is positive. But the steps that need to be taken, there's some complexities, but that's not the main problem. The problem is they don't even know that the opportunity exists, so they don't register. So there are real shortcomings when it comes to communications, and the federal government could do better. For example, communicate with chambers of commerce. We have a contract opening up for such and such a good in such and such a region. Could you let your members know about it? Thank you very much.
MP Massey, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair, my microphone was giving me a problem. I want to go back again to Ms. Thiessen with regards to we have such an integrated economy with the United States. What we don't have the proper competition bureau supports that we have here. If you had like 2 changes that we could make, because what would they be? What would be the 2 things that we would focus on? Because we're, I want to get a larger review. The competition bureau, though, finally got some extra money. Something we've been asking for this committee for a long time. What were the kind of the things that you would prioritize for a change that hopefully will happen? Because even without the legislative changes, they're going to have at least some more resources.
So resources is number one, and it's great that that has been accomplished. The second is to reverse that 2009 change and reinsert the word purchase so that something like wage fixing can be investigated and is considered to be illegal. Another one is to develop those guidelines to investigate the effect of mergers and acquisitions on workers. And then a third is to eliminate the efficiencies defense. And if we did those 3 things, that would be a great start.
And maybe again another question to the analyst with regards to the reversal to 2009. I'm just wondering whether that's a legal change we need or a regulatory one. I'd like to get that response back because that would be important. Because I know that it was a change, but I think it might be a regulatory one at the end of the day that we could do. And do you have any cases with regards to wage fixing that you can highlight? That would be interesting to hear.
That's something that I can do a lot more research on, absolutely. And the one that, again, is like front and center for us at Unifor is looking at this pandemic pay cut where all 3 of the grocery giants cut pandemic pay on the same day. And the Competition Bureau came back and said they couldn't investigate it because of that change. So we don't even know what happened because they weren't able to investigate it at all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I saw the flag there, Madam Chair. So it's all good, but that's interesting because that happened at this committee. Actually, we had them even in front of us publicly talking about how they talk to each other and walking this fine dance with lawyers.
Thank you very much, MP Massey. We will now go to MP Poliev. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First question for Mr. Van Raalte. What is the dollar cost of federal regulation today in Canada? Just the number.
I don't have a global number, Madam Chair.
Right, but you said that your government is respecting the one-for-one rule. That is to say that if there's a new dollar of regulation added, there has to be one subtracted. The only way to enforce that is to know what the total is and to ensure it never goes up. So surely someone over there must know how much we're paying as Canadians for federal regulations, and your bureau is responsible for that.
So since the one-for-one rule has been in place, the cumulative reduction in administrative burden sits around $382 million, Madam Chair.
So what was it before? What was the total before?
There was no benchmark taken, Madam Chair.
Well, you can't possibly know that it's been reduced by $300+ million if you didn't know what it cost before or what it costs now.
So, Madam Chair, the way the one-for-one rule works is that for every dollar that's been proposed to increase administrative burden, another dollar has to be taken out. And so, over the course of both, first the one-for-one rule was a policy, and then it was made into legislation.
Right.
And
no,
so
I understand all that, but it just strikes me as odd that if you guys are supposedly capping the cost of regulation, you have to know what the cap is set at, and we would appreciate getting that number from you. How many regulations does the federal government have?
Madam Chair, the approximate number of regulatory, what we call stock, is around 3,000.
3,000 regulations?
3,000 sets of regulations, and then
sets
every year.
Of regulations. Sets Correct. Of regulations. And how many regulations in each set?
That would depend on each set of regulations.
But on average,
some regulations can be one line, some regulations can be hundreds of pages.
But how many regulations do we have? You said there's 3,000 sets of regulations. So what was the total number of individual regulations?
I don't have that count, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, the Treasury Board Secretariat is supposed to be watching all of this. Supposed to be the guard dog. I don't know if you can hear my dog barking at the front door right now. You guys are supposed to be the guard dog, just like him. I wish he'd bark less, actually. But anyway, I hope that you can find out how many regulations Canadians have to follow and how much cost they're paying and report it back to the committee for this purpose of this study. Thank you very much for your testimony. Madam Waters, we have very little time, but as I understand it, you built a parking lot. You want to build a gondola lot so that you can connect people from some distance away right into the heart of the town of Banff. Is that right? Your mute is on.
I
Ms.
know.
Waters.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Our project has many components. One is the return of passenger rail. One is aerial transit from the station up to our hill. One is intercept parking. And we're working with our community in three right. levels of government to do more broadly other things that help with the mobility of visitors throughout the park.
But just to keep it right to the tangibles, you have built this 500 car lot. You want to be able to transport people from that lot to the village of Banff without having to bring their cars into the town.
Right.
And Parks Canada has not approved that gondola?
No, they have not. And with respect to the intercept parking lot, what we are asking for now is for Parks to provide free shuttles to take people from our lot to points of interest throughout the park,
right.
so that they don't need to rent a car once they get here by train and or park their car in the lot.
And you also want rail connection between Calgary's airport and Banff. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're willing to invest your own money to make that happen?
If need be, yes.
Right. But Parks have they signed off on that proposal?
Parks is actually not involved in the decision making there. It's really other agencies like the Government of Alberta, Canada Infrastructure Bank, where we're getting some of our funding, etc.
Okay. And so what now? What approvals are you waiting for, or have you been you have not received from Parks Canada? If you could summarize
the gondola, the gondola is going to be resubmitted again. We're waiting. We want to build another 900 stall intercept lot on the other side of the tracks for more intercept parking so that we can move Banff to kind of a car-free national park. That's the ultimate goal.
So you want to make Banff car-free, emissions-free, exactly what we're told the government wants, but Parks Canada of all departments is standing in the way. How ironic.
And
it looks
you know
like we have gatekeepers everywhere.
What we're looking for is some
My apologies.
Agreed.
Not only is Parks Canada in the way, but so is the chair. So the chair is going to move to the next speaker. MP Erskine-Smith, you have the last 5-minute round.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I want to get back, Mr. Van Ralt, to the question of cell ag. I know nascent technology in many respects, but is this on your radar in terms of needing a regulatory framework in the way that Singapore now has? And the regulatory framework that I understand 3 working groups in the US under the auspice of the USDA, but also the FDA are working on?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm aware that that there is a need for a regulatory framework that would be led out of the responsible regulatory department.
But are you, in your role, I suppose, not concerned that as it relates to red tape and regulatory challenges, that where Singapore has now established a framework and therefore a company has been approved, the first in the world has been approved, and where the US is very much looking at the economic opportunity, and so making sure that there is a clear regulatory pathway for companies, we are at the moment sending companies in all sorts of different directions?
I'm concerned about a lot of different regulatory frameworks and how the system works together. Again, the responsible ministers would be accountable for bringing that forward. It's not a Treasury Board oversight responsibility, Madam Chair.
Understood. So it would only be if, say, health were to work together with, say, ag in relation to both CFIA, but also in relation to novel foods, that you would then take a look and see, well, is this harmonized in an appropriate way with US rules?
That would be correct.
But so you wouldn't have a role where our existing framework is clearly not harmonized with a new regulatory framework that the US is putting forward. You wouldn't turn your mind to that harmonization?
We would have a role in terms of facilitating those harmonization discussions and the provinces, but again, the lead is with the regulators.
Understood. So is it worth, though, has there been any conversation in your office with the I suppose the president of the Treasury Board or anyone else in your office about if those relevant ministers don't take action, that we are going to be facing regulatory challenges?
Not to date, Madam Chair.
Understood. And to close off, I suppose, I understand the CFIA does have a consultation open in relation to the simulated meat regs. Is this a conversation in your office as well in relation to harmonization with the United States?
If I understand the question correctly, Madam Chair, so the CFI consultation would be open to both members of the Canadian public and would be open to industry and participants internationally. And then those consultations would inform any regulatory proposal that is brought before the Treasury Board for consideration.
And it would be at that moment then that you would look to it and say, hang on a second, these rules need to be better updated to ensure that they're harmonized with the United States.
The sequencing could be such, there could be a number of scenarios. CFIA could identify that they need a regulatory cooperation conversation or facilitation with different trading partners before then they bring forward regulatory proposals, or they can happen in the opposite order.
Well, I'm very glad that your office exists. The one takeaway I would have from this conversation, though, is, and maybe you don't have the resources to do this, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that a more proactive approach would be a welcome one, where when we see other countries move forward to address regulatory burdens in particular sectors, I've mentioned one that matters a lot in terms of innovation and agriculture going forward. If we care about pandemic risk and care about tackling climate change, as a couple of examples, that even though we might not care about animals all to the same degree, but if you're not proactive and you're waiting for others to take on the task of addressing regulatory burdens and they are not seized with it, given the impetus in your shop to say we want to address harmonization, we want to address regulatory burdens, I would encourage, and again, maybe a resource issue, but being proactive on these files as opposed to waiting for other ministers to take leads would seem to me to be a welcome step.
That's a very fair point, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that you guys exist and the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. With that, that'll end our last round of questions. Before the members and we adjourn, I want to give the members an update, but I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today and for your excellent testimony. Thank you so much. On apprécie énormément votre témoignage.
Very much appreciated your testimony.
Not the members, but the witnesses, if they'd like to log off, they may do so. But I'm asking the members to stay on for just a few seconds because I've asked the clerk to circulate to you a draft schedule sort of between now and June so that you will know what we're working on, just to give you an update. And you will have received the draft version 1 of 2 reports, the affordability and accessibility in telecommunications, as well as the domestic manufacturing capacity for COVID-19. So I'm going to ask the members to review those reports. And as we did with the last report, it was helpful to actually submit to the analyst and the clerk your suggested edits, and then they can incorporate those suggested edits, and then we discuss them at a drafting meeting because it's helpful to have both languages of edits and rather than trying to read them into in real time. So if that's the will of the committee, I think it worked well for us last time. I would ask that the members review these 2 draft reports, provide to the clerk any changes to those 2 draft reports by Friday, April 30th, which will give the analyst time to incorporate it and also make sure we have the translation of any edits. And they will provide us version 2 of both reports, which we will work on the week of the 24th of May. So you'll see in the draft schedule that we have circulated to you the planned match for the spring session so that you can be adequately prepared. So I wanted just to make sure that you all knew what we were looking at because we'd like to get as many reports finished before end of June so that we can table them in the House. So is there any questions or comments on that? I mean, I know you've only received them at the beginning of the meeting, but I think this will be helpful for everybody in terms of planning. Donc, si vous avez des questions.
If you have any questions, now's the time. I think we do have a very good game plan. Thank you very much for that.
You have your hand up? MP Baldinelli?
Yeah, quickly, Chair, and thank you. I just wanted to confirm those were sent to our P9 accounts. You would send some information to?
That's correct. So the clerk circulated that I think it was just after the meeting may have already started, but I asked him to draft a plan for us for all of the things that we have to do between now and end of June so that we can make sure we stay on track.
Okay, I'll take a look for that.
Perfect. What we can do, MP Baldinelli, is if there's any questions or concerns, what we can do is maybe at a subsequent meeting, we can take 5 minutes and just go over that if you have any questions, or you can definitely pick up the phone and give me a call. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You take care.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their support today. Merci beaucoup au service de traduction, nos analystes.
Thank you to our interpreters, our analysis, and all of our support staff.
Merci beaucoup.